One or more.
So it's 1 of 5, correct?
Yes.
All right. If I may have it back once you looked at it. What is the first symptom that we're talking about with regard to this re-experiencing? And that would be B, correct? That would
Yes,
be the
symptom
section.
B, yes.
What is the first symptom?
I would have to reference back.
All
I know
right.
the category as a whole that I could speak about.
Why don't you just keep this up here?
Okay.
Let me know when you are referring to it. What is the first one?
Recurrent and intrusive distressing recollections.
What was the first word again?
Recurrent
Uh-huh.
and intrusive distressing recollections.
And recurrent and
Distress.
intrusive?
Recurrent and intrusive distressing recollections.
Tell me about that. What does that refer to?
What we see as this symptom is that thoughts about the trauma keep invading their mind, essentially.
Right.
It creeps in constantly, where it causes intense distress inside of them. It bothers them. They're thinking about it a lot.
And does the defendant meet this criteria?
There's indication that she thought about it, but not to the level that we see in people with PTSD.
What do you mean? It sounds like you're saying, yeah, she thought about it, but no, she didn't. Why don't you explain to me what you mean?
So in any kind of negative event, it's not uncommon for people to think about it. That's very different from it developing into PTSD. For example, some of my own patients, they're so bothered by their thoughts of whatever traumatic event that they experienced that it causes difficulty for them to engage in day-to-day behaviors and activities.
And did the defendant manifest this to you at all during the clinical interview?
No.
How about in her journals, for example? Did any of those journals indicate that she had this recurrent and intrusive depressive recollection?
Distressing.
I'm sorry,
No.
distressing recollection. She did not?
No.
Okay, what is the next item?
Recurrent distressing dreams of the event.
Recurrent distressing dreams of the event, right?
Correct.
And it seems self-explanatory, but tell me about it.
They're having nightmares and dreams about what happened.
And
frequently, recurrent.
And did the defendant report any of this to you?
She indicated that she had some dreams about it, but not recurrent.
And her journals, or any writings that you saw, do they indicate that she had these recurrent dreams of the event?
No.
Next.
Acting or feeling if the traumatic event.
I'm sorry, acting or feeling?
If the traumatic event.
If the traumatic event?
Were reoccurring.
Okay. What's going on here?
What this symptom is reliving it. You can see typically in people with PTSD, they may just be sitting there and all of a sudden start reenacting it. They're reliving the actual traumatic episode.
So in this case, if we're talking about the killing of Mr. Alexander as the triggering event, that's what we would expect to see, her carrying it out.
Yes.
And any indication anywhere that she has had any of this acting or feeling or carrying out this event?
No.
What is the next one?
Intense psychological distress. At exposure.
Pardon?
There's more.
Oh, okay.
At exposure to cues. Just giving you the shortened version.
All right. So what are you talking about, or what is it talking about there?
When there's cues of the trauma, so in this case, the killing, anything related to Travis, talking about him, symbols, signs that remind Miss Arias of him would cause that internal psychological distress, the feeling of uneasiness and strong emotions related to it.
When it says intense, is that a sort of quantification, if you will, of the distress, or is that something else? When you say intense, what does intense
Strong.
mean? And did you see any of that here?
No.
Did you discuss this issue of what may have been involved with her and Mr. Alexander with the defendant?
Yes.
And did you see any of this intense distress when you spoke with her about it?
No, and she was putting herself in situations to be exposed to that.
When you say she was putting herself in situations to be exposed to that, what are you talking about?
She was writing about him in her journal, attending memorial services.
Okay, so if she's attending the memorial services, what does that indicate to you in terms of this intense psychological distress?
That she's able to cope with it, that there's cues that she's walking towards, and that she's able to psychologically handle that.
And are you talking about the memorial in Mesa?
That's one example, yes.
Okay, next.
Physiological reactivity. To cues of the traumatic event.
Of traumatic event?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, what is that?
What physiological reactivity is a visceral response, a beating of the heart, feeling a very strong physical response to exposure.
Any indication of anything that you've read that shows that on the part of the defendant, that she has this physiological reactivity to the traumatic event?
The only thing that I read that would be related to this is there was a note from her attorney that indicated that...
Well, other than that, do you have anything else?
No.
So does she meet these items here?
No.
Let's talk about Section C. And what does Section C refer to?
Avoidance.
And how many symptoms are there to choose from here?
7.
And how many of those must be met in order to meet this criteria?
3 or more.
Right? What's the first one?
Efforts to avoid thoughts, feelings, and conversations associated with the trauma.
All right, what do you know about that?
Similar to the stuff that I highlighted before, she was writing about it quite a bit.
In her journals?
In her journals.
And how about attending the...
Objection, Judge Foundation, writing what?
Sustained.
When you're talking about, let's be more specific, you indicated that she was writing in her journals. What is she writing in her journals that indicates that she's not attempting to avoid thoughts, feelings, or conversations associated with the trauma?
She was writing a lot about Mr. Alexander
And was she
talking
saying,
about him.
was she saying good or bad things?
She was saying good things.
And this was, again, after the trauma or after the killing.
Yes.
What else? What's the next?
Efforts to avoid activities, places, or people.
Or people, is that it?
Associated with the trauma. These are all associated with the trauma.
All right. Tell me about this and whether or not she meets this criteria.
She does not meet this criteria.
Tell me why, and specifically give me the examples as to why you think she does not meet this criteria.
She went to his memorial service. She wrote a letter to his family. She was surrounding herself.
How about sending 20 irises to his grandmother? Is that part of that too?
That would be another variable that I would
What else?
consider.
Anything else other than what you just said?
Again, writing about him, talking to mutual friends.
All right. So does she meet that criteria? In other words, do you see her engaging in efforts to avoid the activities, places, or the people associated with the trauma?
She was not putting effort to avoid him.
Next.
Inability to recall an important aspect of the trauma.
Tell me about that.
When people are exposed to traumatic events, most people have an acute memory of what the traumatic event is. But there are times when there are traumatic events that they lose aspects of what happened.
And is this something that the defendant manifested?
She's reporting to have lost a significant amount of time associated with the killing.
So does she, just based on her statements alone, does she meet this criteria?
Purely based on her report of it alone.
So with this one, would you say yes or no that she meets that criteria?
Based on my knowledge of how memories typically form or surrounding traumatic events, I would not agree that she meets this criteria. Based on her report of it, yes.
So, but based on your schooling and experience, you do not believe that she meets this, right?
That's correct.
Tell me why.
Well, related to traumatic memories specifically, as I highlighted earlier, when people experience a traumatic event, it's not like our day-to-day events that we have. It's hard to remember what we ate for breakfast a week ago or what we wore. That's different with traumatic events. When they occur, they tend to stand out in our mind more, which is part of why we see the development of some disorders that we see. But there are times that people can become hypervigilant and focused on only aspects of the memory, which causes memory loss. The reason why I don't believe that to be the case with Miss Arias is because of the way that she is reporting the memory loss is not consistent with what you typically see.
First of all, tell us what she is reporting that you found important.
She indicated to me that she had a very large gap in her memory.
And when by large gap, how are we talking minutes? What are we talking about?
She told me that she had a several-hour gap.
So we're talking about a several-hour gap. Why is that significant to you?
That's not how it typically presents with traumatic memories.
Explain to me how it is that it works with a traumatic event and the memory issue.
They tend to lose aspects of the incident, small aspects of the incident. The only time that you see that there's those large aspects that are missing, potentially for several hours, is if there's a severe head injury. For example, I had a patient who had blood coming out of his ear one time as a result of a traumatic incident, or if there's any kind of substance abuse that's involved. But you don't see that long of duration. And there's other inconsistencies with her report.
All right, so the inability to report, one of them is that it's too long of a gap, that the time is too long, right?
That's one problem.
What's the other problem, or the other problems as you see it?
What we see with traumatic memories is the more that people talk about them, we see that they tend to gain memory about it. And that's a big part of what we do in treatment. They tend to gain stuff that they thought that they had lost. What I found with Miss Arias is that is not the pattern that she displayed.
What is the pattern that she displayed as to whether or not she recalled items that she didn't previously recall?
If I go back to what she reported to me, she had indicated to me at the time of the killing that she went to go and grab the knife. And then her memory from there was almost completely absent, with the exception of the potential memory that she might have put the knife in the dishwasher. Aside from that, it was completely absent until the point that she hit the Hoover Dam. In terms of what she reported to Dr. Samuels, who I had access to his report, he had indicated to her that
she indicated to him.
I apologize. She indicated to him that she disposed of the weapons and changed her clothing, is what it indicated in his report. The reason why this is important to me is because I saw Miss Arias after Dr. Samuels. If you remember the way I just described it, when we see true memory loss, the more that people talk about it, and Miss Arias has talked about it quite a bit in interviews and with different evaluators, you see an increase of memories. Even if it's just a little bit of an increase of memories, usually it's significant. And in this case, I met with her after Dr. Samuels, so it's showing the opposite pattern that you see in typical traumatic memory.
Anything else?
Related to memory?
Yes, Or are those the reasons that, in your mind, indicate that she did not meet the inability to recall an important aspect of the trauma? First of all, the length, and then second of all, the issue involving her failure to remember as she went along.
I would say that there's another aspect.
And what is that?
What Miss Arias reported to me was that when she reached the Hoover Dam, she looked down at her hands and saw a little bit of blood. And I asked for clarification of that. Was there blood all over? Was there just a little bit of blood? She said there was a little blood on my hand. She said, I knew this meant that I killed him. And I asked her, how do you know that that meant you killed him if you have no memory? She said, I knew I did. So that to me, that's impossible. It's illogical.
Why is that impossible?
It's illogical because if all of a sudden a person had blood on their hands and had no memory of the events that just happened, you wouldn't think I just killed someone. You might think I cut my finger, what happened, not I killed somebody.
Right, so that would be she does not meet that one. What is the next item underneath avoidance?
Markedly diminished interest.
Okay, what does that refer to?
What that symptom is it's called, what we call as psychologists, anhedonia. It's a loss of interest and pleasure in activities. What we see in individuals is that they stop engaging with the world. They stop doing the activities that they enjoyed. And with Miss Arias, she continued to engage with people. There was indication in her journal that she was spending time with friends. She had indicated to me that she had an interest in pursuing school. And there was no indication that there was this anhedonia that was present.
What about the fact that shortly, within a day of killing Mr. Alexander, she finds herself making out with somebody by the name of Brian Burns? Is that contraindicated to this markedly diminished interest or not?
That is a symptom of what I highlighted earlier, of borderline personality disorder.
So that does not have anything to do with this markedly diminished interest. What does that have to do, this involving Mr. Burns, what does that have to do, or how does that fit in with your diagnosis of borderline personality disorder?
I highlighted earlier that people with this disorder tend to have the tendency to either idealize or devalue people. So what you see in this situation is Miss Arias just engaged in a killing and was able to then go and have a romantic encounter with an individual shortly after. What that suggests is there a flip occurred. Earlier I talked about how there's a flip between idealizing and devaluing. To be able to go and engage in the way that she did and not have any sort of external cues that it was problematic suggests that she was at that point of devaluing someone, despising.
And next, what is the next item?
Feeling of detachment or estrangement from others.
Or estrangement, did you say?
Correct.
Okay, what is that?
Similar to what I highlighted earlier, feeling like you can't be around people, you're not part of the crowd, staying away from people, you feel a sense of being separated, estranged from them.
And does she meet this or not?
No.
Why not?
Because of the things that I highlighted earlier.
Tell me what they are.
Related to her activities afterwards, related to her engaging in social activities with friends, with her going again to the memorial and meeting up with people that she was familiar with.
Right.
Her tendency, she was going to go camping at one point.
And so, again, she does not meet that, correct?
Correct.
Next.
Restricted range of affect.
Restricted range of affect? Is that what you
Correct.
And what is that?
You can think of it as having a blunted level of affect, essentially shortening the amount of emotion that you can have. So someone may not be able to have feelings of love during that time, not be able to have any kind of drastic emotions or experiences. And this was, again, if we go back to her journal, she's talking in there about how much she loves Mr. Alexander after the killing. There was no indication that this was a symptom that represented her.
And last is what?
Sense of foreshortened future.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sense of foreshortened future.
Sense of foreshortened future?
Yes.
Okay, what is that?
Individuals with PTSD often have a time seeing what their future is going to be like. They're so caught up in the emotional turmoil that they're experiencing as a result of the trauma that they tend to talk about themselves as nothing outside of that trauma. So contrary to that, they're not talking about dating, courting other men, what their career will look like. And these are things that I saw in Miss Arias.
Specifically, what are you talking about that you did see in the defendant?
Well, in her journal entries, she spoke about courting other men.
Anything else? How about her job? Did she have a job?
She did have a job.
So far, we've seen that B and C are not met. Does that mean at this point that this is not a diagnosis of PTSD that is appropriate?
That's correct.
But let's talk about D and tell us about...
Increased arousal is the general category. The first one is difficulty falling or staying asleep.
And how many of these are there?
There are 5.
And how many do you have to meet?
2.
Okay, difficulty falling or staying asleep. Did you talk to the defendant about that?
We did talk about sleep.
And what did she say?
She indicated when she first got to jail that she had difficulty sleeping, but it was because of the loud noises that were in the jail.
So doesn't that sort of seem to fall under this category if she's having difficulty falling asleep because of the noise in the jail or not?
No, we're looking, remember, at the etiology of it. Where did this come from? What is this a result of? And again, I'm going to try and link this back to the actual trauma. In this case, it does not meet criteria because it's not associated with the trauma.
So it's not associated with any trauma, is what you're saying?
Right. It's a change in environment.
Next.
Irritability or outburst of anger.
Okay. Does she meet this?
Consistent with what I highlighted before, that this is much more of a personality pattern that we see with her. Any symptom that would be suggestive of PTSD, we would expect that the symptom emerged only after they were exposed to the trauma, not as a pattern throughout their life. So no, she does not seem to meet the symptom.
And going against that is Exhibit 623, where she talks about these outbursts of anger, correct?
That's correct.
Next.
Difficulty concentrating.
I think we know what that means. Why don't you tell us what it means to you?
The ability to maintain and sustain attention. There was indication by Miss Arias that concentration was an area that she has struggled with the tendency to be clumsy, was also highlighted in the records. Again, we're looking for symptoms that would occur after the traumatic event. This does not seem to be a new symptom for Ms. Arias.
All right. So she doesn't meet that either then.
That's correct.
And number 4 of the 5?
Hypervigilance.
What is that?
I explained earlier that hypervigilance is a tendency to be really hyper aware of your environment, to know what's going on around. And this is a protective measure. When you're exposed to a traumatic event, your body gets heightened. So you look around, make sure you're safe. And I was fortunate enough to have videos of Miss Arias shortly after the killing, in the video that she participated in related to 48 hours and her police videos, where I would be able to observe that symptom if it was present.
And was it present in those videos that you observed?
It was not present.
And finally, number 5 under this category is what?
Exaggerated startle response.
Exaggerated, what was it again?
Startle.
Oh, startle response. What are we talking about there?
The tendency to get startled very easily, and also, like it says, exaggerated. So instead of just maybe a quick little jerk that someone may have if they hear a noise, we would see an exaggerated kind of jerk. So it's a startle response.
And did you see this with regard to the defendant?
No, and again, I was lucky enough to have the records that I did, and that it showed me her behavior shortly after. And there were times in the video where doors were slamming and there were noise that I would expect to see that kind of symptom.
And did you see that?
No.
So based on this assessment, do you agree or disagree with Dr. Samuels as to the post-traumatic stress disorder?
She does not have post-traumatic stress disorder.
How about with regard to Dr. Carp? Do you agree with her assessment that this was PTSD due to this pattern, if you will, of abuse?
No.
Are you familiar with the term or with the term adjustment disorder?
Yes, I am.
What is that?
Adjustment disorder is it's a psychological disorder that refers to a change in behavior as a result of something that happens in someone's environment, essentially. It's in the case of Miss Arias, I did diagnose her with
Objection. Fiasco. Sustained.
So this is something that you looked at in addition to this borderline personality disorder.
That's correct.
Do you know whether or not Dr. Samuels addressed this issue in his report?
He did not give her this diagnosis.
And he didn't indicate either way with regard to that, correct?
Correct.
Ma'am, are you familiar with the issue involving the defendant's, or are you familiar with memory issues as they apply in this particular case?
Yes.
Tell me about the memory issues that are involved in this case, that as you know them.
As I highlighted earlier, she indicated that she has a very large memory gap of the night of the killing.
Well, are you familiar with the fight or flight issue as it applies to memory?
Yes.
Tell me about, first of all, what fight or flight is, and then we'll talk about the memory issue.
Sure. Fight or flight is a response. It's a fear response that occurs in a situation where there's some sort of stimulus that is causing fear. In that situation, our body essentially prepares to protect itself. So the way that it prepares to protect itself is that our blood flows to those places that are going to help us protect ourselves, like our muscle groups, to be able to run fast enough. Our body sweats so that, from an evolutionary perspective, if the tiger bites onto us, it'll slide off easier. Our body essentially prepares to protect ourselves.
And how is memory affected during these fight or flight situations?
It becomes secondary because our body is trying to protect ourselves.
And so what happens in terms of whether or not a person can remember or not remember what's going on?
So during these times, there are times that people have memory gaps, and during these times we see that behaviorally they act very different in that because there's parts of their brain that are losing access to the typical blood flow that it would have, we see that different areas of the brain don't act in the same way that it does. For example, our frontal lobe is what helps dictate our ability to organize, our ability to plan, all these kind of higher order functions that we do as humans that, for example, we wouldn't expect a dog to be able to do. Organize, planful behavior. When someone's in a fight or flight mode, we don't see those kinds of behaviors. They're completely just trying to run and protect themselves or fight. You don't see any of that other kind of higher, what we call higher order behaviors.
And did you see any higher order behaviors here that speak against the fight or flight memory loss issue?
Objection, Judge, may we approach?
Yes. Overruled.
With regard to this issue about fight or flight and this issue about the memory afterwards, in terms of the memory, and I'm just talking about the memory afterwards, were there elements that of what happened after the killing that indicate to you that this was not a felony, but a fight or flight circumstance?
There was indication to me that this was not fight or flight.
Why is that? And be specific about it.
Related to...
After the killing, correct.
Related to the
Anything
behavior...
having to do after the killing, not before the killing.
During the killing.
Judge, perhaps we can take a break now.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take the afternoon recess. Please be back in the designated area at 3:15. Please remember the admonition. You are excused. Record will show the jury has left the courtroom. You may step down. Counsel, anything before the break? No. We are at recess.